everyone. I'm Chelsea Randall. I work at Devon County Council in the Transport Planning team. Last year, I completed my Transport Planning Masters, and for my dissertation research, I created a toolkit for local authorities to run public consultations. So, interacting with the public through public consultations, as well as other forms of engagement, is a key part of the transport planning industry, and it's becoming increasingly more so. It's something which is frequently seen in the media and which the public have come to expect. Furthermore, most of the funding we're seeing coming forward from central government now is relying on the public having been consulted with as part of the planning and design process. Yet, despite how needed and expected this consultation is, there's a lack of structure, uniformity, there's no framework on running a public consultation. To try and fill this gap, I undertook research with the aim to produce a toolkit which can be used to structure public consultations. This research was done in 3 parts. Semi-structured interviews with members of the team I work in to understand the key issues in public consultations, and from that developed the toolkit. This was then evaluated through a focus group, and finally a case study was applied to understand how it could work in real life. The key questions being asked throughout this research were: should we consult? Are consultations valuable, useful, appreciated by members of the team and the public at large? And this allowed me to draw out the core issues which we are facing. The message from everybody I spoke to was clear. We think the public do appreciate being consulted. Sometimes they may criticise how they're asked or how frequently they're asked questions, or complain that they're not listened to, but they do appreciate being asked. It was also clear that internally, consultations are really, really valuable. They show us parts of a scheme we may have missed or help us look at things in a different way. They ensure that the transport schemes we're bringing forward are needed or wanted by the public, and uses that local knowledge to help us ensure the best possible outcomes. However, it also came across that consultations are complicated and challenging, not necessarily the part of the job that people enjoy the most, with one member of staff describing it as a necessary evil. And in terms of the problems with running a consultation, the same 5 key themes were apparent with everybody I spoke to. I'll go through these now, accompanied with some quotes from those interviews. First, there was a desire for a clear structure. It was clear that people thought they would benefit from a unified process, or even some guidelines on when we should consult in a scheme, what schemes should consult on, and what is needed within a consultation. People said that this would help them set realistic timelines and ensure that there was enough resource in place to make any consultation high quality and useful. Secondly, a lot of discussion came up around the concept of disingenuous consultation. Concerns were raised that sometimes consultations are run when the response we get from the public can't actually be listened to. This leads to a poor public perception, as people think they're being ignored, or that the consultation is only being run for show. In turn, this leads to frustration within the team, especially when those accusations that the public aren't being listened to is somewhat true. Often, schemes are put forward where changes, especially big changes, aren't actually possible. There might be a lot of physical constraints on design, but in that case, the consultation should be upfront about this, rather than implying that any comments we get could be actioned and those changes made to designs. Disingenuous consultations need to be avoided, and one way to do this would be to lay out the aims of the consultation, at the beginning, and ensuring it's clear what the next steps are. In line with this, there were suggestions that consultations need to be proportional, as opposed to a blanket consultation process that is adopted for all projects, irrelevant of every other context. This links to the previous point of disingenuous consultations, because if no changes or only very small changes can be made, then the consultation should reflect that. Rather than asking lots of questions that can only be ignored, instead the consultation should be approached as an information sharing exercise, which reflects and portrays to the public that most of the decisions have already been made. Equally, there were suggestions that not all sizes of scheme require the same size of consultation. As this quote says, a zebra crossing consultation doesn't necessarily need the same time and resource as a whole bypass, which will affect a greater number of people. Some people went as far to say that the very smallest changes or schemes where they will be implemented no matter what, for instance, if they're addressing a serious road safety concern, shouldn't be consulted on at all. The last 2 points I'll discuss are related to each other. Firstly, it was requested that ways be sought to save staff time. Consultations, the running of them and the planning of them, it's very time consuming. And it was suggested that if some way could be found to save that time, that would be really appreciated. This ranged from some people suggesting we found a way to better structure how we analyse data coming in from the public, and other people suggested that we standardise the process of organising in-person events. And closely related to this is the theme of staff wellbeing. The nature of consultations can be very difficult to manage from a staff wellbeing perspective. Some aspects of this are obvious. Some people I spoke to told me stories of being backed into corners at in-person events, and one person even told me about their picture being put on a dartboard by angry local residents. But it's not quite as some of it's not quite as obvious as this. People said that the pressure of having to digest the constant comments from the public, which often include really negative comments or even abusive comments, can be difficult to deal with. And digesting that constant feedback, as well as actively going out to get more feedback from people, is a task which just takes a lot out of people. So in response to these 5 issues, I produced a toolkit to try and overcome them. The first part of this toolkit is a key information document, which is used to bring together all information regarding that consultation and the project. It lays out, by laying out this information right at the beginning of the process, it can avoid confusion later on. Clarifying the aims and the next steps mean that we can avoid misleading the public as well. These expectations can also be set using the flowchart, which can help team members to understand what stage a project's at, what changes might be possible, and therefore what type of consultation would be appropriate. This should allow us to embrace the concept of different types of consultations, which are more proportional to the needs of that project. The bulk of the toolkit is a checklist, with every task that might be needed within the planning and running of a consultation broken down into sections. Various versions of this tool checklist will be needed according to the different types of consultations run according to the flowchart. But by adopting this structure, it will ensure that tasks aren't forgotten and provide that clear structure that many of the people I spoke to wanted. The checklist will also include, where it's appropriate, links to the template documents, which would be best practice for that local authority, which should save staff time and provide consistency. And additionally, we'll lay out where risk assessments are needed to ensure that the staff wellbeing is considered throughout, as opposed to when it becomes a problem. Specific risk assessments, such as in public exhibitions, are always used, they're not forgotten, but this is also about wider risk assessments for just absorbing public comment and assisting in the consultation in some way. Alongside this, frequent staff briefings are built into the process to ensure that all members of the staff feel fully up to date with the project and the consultation and feel equipped to answer any public queries. Together, this toolkit will address the key issues discussed earlier. A clear structure is provided by the checklist. Disingenuous consultations will be avoided by setting clear expectations by the key information document and the flowchart. The flowchart will also ensure that consultations are proportional to the needs and stage of the project. Staff time will be saved by hopefully the whole thing, but also the document templates which are linked in the checklist, and staff wellbeing will be protected and hopefully improved by the risk assessments and the staff briefings. Addressing these issues through this toolkit will improve consultations going forward in terms of the experience of staff running them and the quality the public receive. And this is important in a time where we're expecting more consultations to be undertaken and they're becoming highly scrutinised by the media and members of the public. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chelsea. That was a really interesting presentation. I know consultations can be very conflicting, and it's really hard to like try and keep everyone in the loop at the same time. The toolkit's really useful as well. My main question is, so the toolkit that you produced, was that mainly for like LTAs, as opposed to keeping the public informed at each stage?
Yeah, well, it's mainly for local authorities to use, but hopefully the intention is by using this having this in place at the beginning of a project rather than just when a consultation is going to be run, it means that the public should be kept more up to date more frequently, because often the case is that we've got this idea of what a public consultation is, and therefore the public might not be informed until we reach that public consultation stage. Whereas by using this flowchart and understanding that there are options for public engagement throughout the process, the public should be kept engaged more frequently, because there's different levels of how we can do that. A lot of people I spoke to said that they think we need to engage more, but that doesn't mean do more consultations, but we should be using engagement from a much earlier stage and sort of recognizing that there is a difference between engagement and consultation rather than being used as synonyms. And so both is, I guess, the answer to your question.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
I was going to ask, thanks Chelsea for your presentation. Is there anything sort of in hindsight now that you would have changed about the toolkit? Obviously it's probably an evolving piece of work, but has anything stood out that maybe you shouldn't have put in it or you should have done differently?
I think, as you say, it's an evolving piece of work. I think the intention is that it so the checklist is constantly updated and like templates are constantly updated, and I've only been able to use this so far retrospectively rather than on an active coming forward consultation. So I think there might be holes that need to be filled in. I think this is just based on Devon's experience. So I think there's not anything that I think I would do differently, but I think more work maybe needs to be done before it can be, rolled out nationally as this is how we do consultations.
James, do you want to go?
So do you want to go first, Neil? Because I've got Merlin as well with a question lined up.
Right. Well, firstly, sorry for not appearing, but thank you, Merlin, for letting me through the door. It's good to be here. Very interesting, Chelsea. One of the things that intrigues me is that over the years, I know clients have been trying to get improved consultation for keynote projects in particular. But I've noticed a trend that a lot of major consultancies will turn up or offer to do the job, and they'll bring in a specialist comms or PR company. Now, I've seen mixed results from that, I have to say. So I welcome the idea that people within our profession who understand the technicalities of a project can kind of lead and manage consultations. I personally think there's more value in that. So that's more of a comment. But I was wondering, through your process, have you been able to use it in anger in the real world? And does it deal with issues of consistency of message that goes out from different people?
Yeah, so the second part of your question, definitely it helps with consistency. Part of what sort of inspired this toolkit was I ran a consultation last year, and I found that when I was wandering around the public exhibitions, everybody was telling the public slightly different things. Like no one was telling something that was wrong, but the message maybe hadn't been completely clarified between all of us. So the idea by using the key information document, for instance, is that you sit down as a project team right at the beginning and you lay out exactly what the message is that you're putting out, rather than there being some slight confusion between you, which should provide that consistency. Sorry, what was the first half of your question? I can't remember.
It was just about consistency of message. And had you actually applied it in order, i.e., has it been in the wind tunnel and been tested for real?
Sure. It's been tested. So retrospectively, we've looked at consultations I've done in the past and said, well, if I'd done this from the beginning, how would the consultation have looked different? As a whole package, it hasn't been used yet. Individual bits of it have, but not as a whole package.
Yeah,
I look forward to doing that.
Good, thanks.
I think Merlin's had a bit of a problem, so he's I think it's dropped off. But I think there was already solving the question which I had put it, which I was thinking of, and have you applied this or what could have been done differently. So I think we're all good there. I think just say if anyone else has any questions they would like to ask, please drop them into the Q&A and we will try and ask presenters, but we'll focus with the judges in there.
Okay, I think there is one that's come in from Thomas. I think this will be the last question for you, Chelsea, and then we'll move on just in the interest of time. So consultation presentation question. Do you feel the concept of consultation is fairly high level and generic? Are there possibilities for doing more targeted consultation, for example, provision for disability for better results?
Sure. I think that it's probably a case by case. But I think that's the type of thing that needs to be built into consultation. So I think the term consultation is pretty generic, but that almost means that we can do individual niche consultations as well with the same process being applied. I think the whole idea of the flow chart is that rather than consultation being a generic thing, you work out exactly what you mean by consultation and whether it is something that's a very specific question or whether it's a much broader concept.
Yeah, I guess it's a difference between consultation versus engagement and the different types they can do. Okay, yeah, cool. Thanks, Chelsea. I think we'll move on now if that's okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.